For 13 years, there was silence. After the murder of Dolores Davis in 1991, the cryptic messages and terrifying packages from the BTK killer stopped. The city of Wichita, Kansas, which had lived under the shadow of his methodical brutality for nearly 2 decades, began to breathe again. The case went cold, relegated to dusty file cabinets and the memories of a generation haunted by a phantom. To the outside world, it seemed the monster had vanished. Perhaps he was dead or imprisoned for some lesser crime. But Dennis Rader was very much alive. He was living a life of mundane predictability, channeling his monstrous energies into petty tyrannies. As a compliance officer, his work became a parody of his projects. He would stalk non-compliant residents, documenting their minor infractions with the same meticulous detail he once reserved for his victims, taking photos and building extensive files on overgrown lawns or stray animals. These roles were not just a cover, they were a necessary, non-lethal outlet. They allowed him to exercise his obsession with control and feel a sliver of the dominance he craved. But it was a starvation diet for a beast like Factor X. Beneath the placid surface of the church council president and the diligent city worker, the monster was a constant, hungry presence. Rader spent his nights not prowling, but pacing his basement, surrounded by his trophies, photographs, and driver's licenses taken from his victims. He would lay them out, meticulously reliving every moment, feeding the monster just enough to keep it from demanding a fresh kill. The pressure was a low hum, a constant vibration beneath the floorboards of his carefully constructed life, waiting for a reason to erupt. The catalyst arrived in January 2004. The Wichita Eagle newspaper ran a retrospective story marking the 30th anniversary of the first and most shocking of BTK's crimes, the slaughter of the Otero family. The article revisited the terror, but it also speculated on the killer's fate, treating him as a ghost of the past. For Dennis Rader, reading those words was an intolerable insult. His legacy, the monument of fear he had so carefully constructed, was being relegated to a historical footnote. His ego, the engine of his entire murderous career, roared back to life. He had spent years meticulously documenting his crimes, hoarding souvenirs, reliving his moments of ultimate power. To be forgotten was a fate worse than death. He decided it was time to remind Wichita and the world who was still in control. The silence was about to be shattered. In March 2004, a padded envelope arrived at Cake, a local television station. Inside was a chilling message from the past. It contained a copy of the driver's license of Vicky Vegeler, a victim from an unsolved 1986 murder, along with 3 Polaroid photographs of her body taken by the killer himself. The message was clear and terrifying. BTK was back. This was not a copycat. This was proof. And with that first communication, the cat-and-mouse game that would define his downfall began. Rader was intoxicated by the renewed attention. He began sending a flurry of packages to media outlets and police. They contained puzzles, taunting letters, and crude drawings. He was no longer just a killer. He was a media personality of his own dark creation. The reemergence of BTK sent a wave of cold dread through Wichita. The name itself was a trigger, unlocking a generation's worth of buried fears. People who had grown up with the Phantom were now parents themselves, and the old anxieties returned with a vengeance. The media landscape, now saturated with 24-hour news and the nascent internet, exploded with the story. BTK was no longer a local boogeyman. He was a national headline. This renewed frenzy was exactly what Rader had craved, and he watched it unfold with immense satisfaction. Meanwhile, the Wichita Police Department, under the leadership of Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, felt the crushing weight of history. They were not just investigating a new crime, they were trying to solve the defining cold case of their city's history. The task force was re-energized, meticulously analyzing every new communication. They mapped the locations where he left his packages, swabbed the stamps and envelopes for DNA, and updated their psychological profile. They noted the change in his tone. More arrogant, more desperate for a dialogue. Rader believed he was the sole author of this new chapter. But with every package he sent, with every game he played, he was giving the police a new piece of the puzzle. He thought he was in control, but he was in fact writing his own confession in slow motion. His arrogance escalated with each communication. He left a post-Toasties cereal box on the side of a road, containing a letter demanding attention and a doll, bound and posed to mimic his victims. In his letters, he mocked the police, reveling in his apparent invincibility. He asked them, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" He saw himself as an untouchable genius, locked in a battle of wits with law enforcement, a game he was certain he was winning. It was this supreme confidence, this utter belief in his own superiority, that led him to make the single greatest mistake of his life. He decided to ask his pursuers for technical support. In a package sent in early 2005, amongst the usual taunts, was an index card with a simple, chilling question. Could the police trace a floppy disk back to the computer it came from? "Be honest," he wrote, as if he were negotiating a business deal. For the investigators on the BTK task force, led by Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, this was the opening they had been dreaming of. They knew they were dealing with an ego that could be manipulated. They formulated a brilliant and daring response. They couldn't reply directly, so they took a page from Rader's own playbook of cryptic communication. They placed a coded ad in the classified section of the local newspaper. Using a code name Rader had suggested for himself, Rex, the ad read simply, "Rex, it will be okay." It was a message of false reassurance, a signal that his communication was secure, that he was safe to proceed. Rader saw the ad and believed it completely. He thought he had established a secret line of communication, that he was manipulating the police into giving him the information he needed. He felt invincible. On February 16, 2005, confident that he had outsmarted everyone, he mailed a final package to a Fox affiliate station. Inside was a letter, a gold-colored necklace believed to be from one of his victims, and the instrument of his own demise, a purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disk. He had taken the bait. The trap was sprung. The disk was immediately handed over to the Wichita Police Department's Digital Forensic Unit. The investigators worked feverishly, searching for any trace Rader might have left behind. On the surface, the disk contained a chapter of a book he was writing, a self-aggrandizing document titled The BTK Story. But the crucial evidence wasn't in what he had written. It was in what he thought he had erased. Buried within the disk's data was the ghost of a deleted Microsoft Word document. And in that ghost was the digital fingerprint that would finally bring him down. The file's metadata, a trace of information automatically saved by the software, contained 2 words that would end a 30-year reign of terror. It listed the last user as Dennis and the organization as Christ Lutheran Church. Inside the lab, the digital forensics team felt a surge of adrenaline. They ran a program to recover deleted data, a digital Hail Mary. As the code scrolled, a ghost in the machine began to take shape. A deleted Word document. The metadata was intact. The moment the investigators saw the words, last modified by Dennis, Organization, Christ Lutheran Church, a stunned silence fell over the room. For 3 decades, BTK had been a phantom. Now he had a first name and a place. Detectives scrambled for church directories and city records. There he was, Dennis Rader, president of the church council, a man who had never appeared on any of their thousands of previous suspect lists. The chilling reality washed over them. He wasn't a drifter or a recluse. He was a pillar of the community, hiding in the most public place imaginable. The final piece, the one that had to be right, was DNA. In a tense and secretive operation, they secured a warrant for a PAP smear his daughter had given years earlier at a university clinic. The sample was rushed to the lab. The waiting was agonizing. When the call came back confirming a familial match to the DNA left at multiple BTK crime scenes, it was not a moment of celebration, but of grim, profound certainty. The 30-year nightmare was finally over. The ghost had a face. The investigation, which had been a marathon of frustration for decades, now became a dead sprint. A quick search revealed that a man named Dennis Rader was not just a member of the Christ Lutheran Church. He was the president of the Congregation Council. The pieces of the puzzle began to snap into place with breathtaking speed. They dug into Rader's employment history and discovered he had worked for ADT Security Services from 1974 to 1989, a period that perfectly aligned with the BTK murders. This explained his intimate knowledge of alarm systems and his ability to stalk victims, knowing their routines and when their homes would be vulnerable. After 31 years, the ghost finally had a name. On February 25, 2005, the end came not with a bang, but with the quiet professionalism of a routine traffic stop. Dennis Rader was driving home from his job as a city compliance officer, perhaps contemplating his next move in his grand game. As he neared his home, he was surrounded. Tactical units swarmed his Jeep Cherokee. There was no chase, no shootout, no dramatic final standoff. The man who had styled himself as a criminal mastermind, a predator who held a city in his grip, was arrested without a word of protest. Lieutenant Landwehr approached the driver's side window. The hunt was over. In the interrogation room, the carefully constructed persona of Dennis Rader, church president and family man, disintegrated. Once he began talking, he couldn't stop. For more than 30 hours he confessed, not with remorse or anguish, but with the detached, procedural pride of an administrator detailing a successful project. He spoke of his victims not as people, but as projects to be completed. He described his motive as a need to service Factor X, a term he invented for the dark urges that drove him. His confession was the ultimate performance of a narcissist, a final, desperate grasp for the spotlight he felt he had been denied for so long. He was the star of his own movie, and he was finally delivering his monologue. In the end, the very psychological traits that made Dennis Rader a monster were the ones that led to his capture. His pathological need for recognition drove him from the safety of his 13-year silence. His profound arrogance made him believe he could outwit a world of technology he fundamentally misunderstood. And his obsession with control compelled him to engage with the very people who were hunting him. The floppy disk was not an isolated mistake. It was the inevitable result of his lifelong compulsion to document his own dark deeds. The story of BTK is a chilling lesson in the duality of human nature, a reminder that the most ordinary of facades can conceal the most profound darkness. But it is also a testament to the fatal flaw of pride, the certainty that even the most meticulous monster, driven by an insatiable ego, will eventually write his own final chapter. But Dennis Rader's need for attention did not end with his confession. In many ways, it intensified. Having regained the spotlight he believed was rightfully his, he now sought to control the final telling of the story. In June 2005, Rader appeared in a Kansas courtroom to formally enter his guilty pleas. What followed stunned even seasoned prosecutors. Instead of brief acknowledgments, Rader delivered methodical, emotionally detached narratives of each murder. He corrected details, he clarified timelines, he spoke with the calm precision of a man presenting case studies rather than crimes. There was no apology, no visible remorse, only performance. For the families of the victims, this moment was devastating. They were forced to sit feet away, as Rader described how he selected their loved ones, how he gained entry to their homes, and how he carried out the acts that had stolen entire futures. He spoke of people as processes, lives as objectives. When the victim impact statements began, the tone of the room shifted. Family members described decades of grief, unanswered questions, and the psychological toll of living in a city haunted by a name. Some spoke directly to Rader, stripping away his mythology and confronting him as what he truly was. Others refused to acknowledge him at all, denying him the attention he craved. Rader listened, silent, expressionless. On August 18, 2005, Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. The court stripped him of the stage. He would never again address an audience on his own terms. In prison, Rader attempted to continue the narrative. He wrote letters, sought interviews, requested recognition. But the world had moved on. His voice was no longer amplified. His control was gone. The fallout extended far beyond the courtroom. For Rader's family, the revelation was an apocalypse. His wife and 2 children had to confront the unimaginable reality that the man they knew, the husband, the father, the scout leader, was a complete fabrication, a mask worn by a monster. They were plunged into a surreal nightmare, their identities and memories forever tainted by his secret atrocities. His church congregation and neighbors were left reeling, grappling with the chilling knowledge that a man they had trusted, a man who had been a leader in their community, was responsible for the city's darkest chapter. The case left an indelible scar on Wichita, a permanent reminder of the terrifying ease with which evil can hide in the most ordinary of places. What remained were the consequences. Families rebuilding lives, a city forced to confront how easily evil had hidden in plain sight. A reminder that monsters do not always look monstrous. The BTK case is not merely a story of violence. It is a study in ego, entitlement, and the dangers of unchecked narcissism. Rader did not resurface because he needed to kill again. He resurfaced because he needed to be seen. In the end, Dennis Rader was not undone by brilliance or bravery alone. He was undone by pride, by the same hunger for recognition that fueled his crimes and ultimately led him back into the light. He wanted to be remembered forever. And he is, not as a mastermind, not as a genius, but as a man who could not remain silent.